Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe to my channel. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Gee, get away from me. A shrill voice rang out, though there was no one around to hear it. Huddled in a corner was a short, green-haired girl. Her clothes were raggy and unkempt, and there were a couple sizable tears in them. Backing her up into said corner was a tall, lanky man with far too many stains on his shirt. He looked exactly like a typical low-class criminal, with shaggy, dirty hair and cold, unfocused eyes. Probably the drugs he likely took. In his hand, he held a switchblade that was surprisingly wielded with fluency, despite him clearly being under the influence. "Come on, girl, there's no need for that. Just come with me and it'll be good," the man leered, taking a step closer. The girl just sobbed and pressed herself further against the wall. None of this was supposed to happen. She was just getting robbing some food for her sister and was caught unawares as she was making her way back. The food she had stolen was currently spilled out across the ground. "When the time comes, don't go expecting someone to come save you," a voice rang out in her head. "I fucking know that," the girl yelled mentally. The voice continued its line, the same line that it always said whenever she was in this type of situation. "Only you can save yourself." The short girl only bared her teeth at the man. Her powers weren't working, and the man was walking closer. She raised her arm up in an attempt to channel her energy, but nothing was happening. She was too overwhelmed with fear to focus. After all, laying beside the man was the body of her sister. The man grabbed her arm and pulled her out of the alleyway. She attempted to punch the man, but her feeble punch simply bounced off his shirt. She tried to drag her feet along the ground, causing the man to slow down. Frowning, he turned around and gave a slow but heavy punch to her face. A choked cry came from the girl and she fell backwards. The man decided to continue dragging her. This time, she didn't resist. There, that wasn't so hard, was it?" He grinned, walking towards a van parked nearby. His smile showed a row of discolored teeth, some rotting. "Now, get in the van and I'll treat you to some nice soupa, how's that sound?" His voice was incredibly fake, using the types of sounds a parent would talk to their baby with. The only difference in his voice was the sheer malice it held, sending chills down the girl's spine. He had opened the van door by now and was about to shove the girl in when a voice called out. "Hey, you can't go around and abduct girls off the street. Stop immediately." A man in a blue tracksuit ran towards them. "Fuck off, it's none of your business," the low-class criminal shouted, though his grip tightened on his knife. "It's all of my business. I can't let you drag around an innocent girl," blue tracksuit guy said, now standing next to them, arms crossed. Quote. The criminal stared at the man's face, so full of determination and with a fire in his eyes. "You have such nice eyes," the criminal said. "Why, then," blue tracksuit guy's eyes widened as the man suddenly swung a knife at him. Narrowly dodging the blade, he cursed as the side of his precious tracksuit was caught by the blade. The knife ripped through the fabric, creating a large gash. "That cost me a lot, you know," he shouted, angry. Dodging a second swing, he ducked under the criminal's arm and gave a resounding uppercut. It connected solidly and lifted the criminal a feet above the ground, spittle flying out his mouth. The little girl let out a yelp as the criminal collapsed onto the ground. Staring at the blue tracksuit guy in half horror and half admiration, she managed to whisper out, Who are you?" "Name's Saitama," the blue tracksuit guy said, reaching out his hand for her to shake. She didn't take it. I'm called Tatsumaki, so let me get this straight. You've recently escaped from some sort of underground lab, and now you're roaming the streets stealing food to live," Saitama said, chewing his udon noodles. "Yeah, my parents sold me away when I was young," Tatsumaki said, looking downcast. Her bowl of noodles lay on the table, completely finished. Saitama winced. Hell, his childhood wasn't great by any means. But he'd much rather live his than the nightmare Tatsumaki had to go through. Tatsumaki didn't even know why she was opening up with this man. At first, she had been cold, calculating in her responses as they walked down the city streets to the noodle shop. She didn't want to get to know this guy, and definitely did not want him to know her. But something about was different, especially considering this was the first second time that someone stood up for her. The first time was Blast, the man who saved her from that wretched foundation. And now the second was this man. He had engaged in some light conversation, none of it probing. A nearby cat had walked by, and after some failed enticing it hissed at him and ran away. Tatsumaki had laughed. He appeared to be a pretty carefree guy. He said he was going on a midnight run, because he had forgotten to do so earlier. Mentally, Tatsumaki scoffed. No one was stupid or determined, right? Saitama just seemed to have an air of calm and relaxation though, and she couldn't help but began to talk. Of course, caring for Fubuki was also a good way to her heart. Oh, and the free noodles. Those were good too. Fubuki was currently sleeping on a nearby chair. Her knife wound wasn't as deep as they thought, and with some bandages and alcohol wipes Saitama had on his person, why was he even carrying those? It seemed pretty patched up. How old are you? Saitama asked, snapping Tatsumaki out of her thoughts. Quote. I'm 25. Saitama's mouth dropped. What the fuck? This green-haired kid? No way. To be fair, he doubted a girl with a younger sister as well endowed as a fashion idol would be under 18. So, why this? Saitama said, spreading out his arms. Tatsumaki knew what he was referring to. Well, my family was rich, and blessed, or cursed you could say. Me and my sister were born with ESP powers. You know, I can move stuff around. To demonstrate, she lifted up a chopstick, the green hue coating it glowing gently. It floated in the air, and then poked Saitama in the nose. Hey, Saitama protested, making him close his mouth. He hadn't realized his jaw had dropped at the sight of her powers. Tatsumaki giggled. Anyway, some scientists turned out they belonged to a really powerful organization. My parents, sensing an opportunity, sold us out at the first chance they got. Must have been a lot of cash they were offered. At least, I guess I graduated elementary school before it happened. Tatsumaki shuddered as she remembered the scene. A comforting hand was placed on her head, ruffling her hair. Don't worry, my little girl. These fine men are just here to run some tests. Like going to the doctors, you know. When will I come back? An innocent Tatsumaki asked, looking up at her dad. I can't even remember his face, thought Tatsumaki. Her dad's cheerful smile grew smaller. Soon, my sweet. Maybe in soon. Tatsumaki watched her sister be loaded in a military SKPC. It seemed pretty cool, like the ones from action movies. Maybe she'd get to ride in it as well. Suddenly, a man in an overcoat walked up. Hey there, little one. Come with me. Scary. That's what Tatsumaki thought, looking up. Stereotypical glasses, white overcoat, gray hair. But his smile and his eyes, they were nothing but cold. Maybe she would get to ride in the cool car though, right? Maybe it was worth it. Taking the hand, she was led to a separate car, this one a fancy limousine. Inside, a fat man in a black suit welcomed her. Whoa there, you okay? Saitama said, interrupting her flashback. Tatsumaki cursed. She didn't notice the tears running down her cheeks. A calm and reassuring hand patted her head. Taking a rattling breath, Tatsumaki attempted to calm down. The pats were helping a lot, surprisingly. While it reminded her of her dad, it was a much better display of affection that her dad ever gave her. Display of affection? What the fuck was she thinking? This was some random stranger she'd met. Albeit a very nice, calming, and reassuring stranger. A stranger nonetheless. Sorry about that, I'd rather not think about the past. She said, not meeting his eyes. Ah, my bad, shouldn't have asked, Saitama said, chugging his drink. Crushing the empty can in his hand, he threw it at a nearby trash can. Kobe, he said, only for the can to bounce off the rim. You suck at that, Tatsumaki scoffed, and lifted the can up. She dumped it into the trash, much to the amazement of Saitama. What? Tatsumaki said, taking in Saitama's expression. That's still so cool, he said, bringing a flush to Tatsumaki's cheeks. Thanks. Saitama yawned. Hey, it's getting pretty late. Where do you live? I'll walk you, or to the nearest police station or something if you're not comfortable. Late. It's fucking 1 a.m. now. Tatsumaki rolled her eyes. Hey, I'm just saying. Anyway, let's go. He picked up Fubuki in a sweeping fashion and carried her bridal style. For some reason, Tatsumaki didn't mind, even though normally she would be killing, or attempting to, whoever would try such a thing. Thanks for the noodles, man. Sorry for coming so late, Saitama said, waving to the sole worker at the restaurant. It's no biggie. Good night, chief, and good luck on your workout, the worker said, raising his thumb. The pair walked out of the store, Fubuki in Saitama's arms. They trudged down the dark sidewalk of the city, dim street lights being their main source of light. They weren't well maintained, and it was pretty common for one of them to start flickering every once in a while. Good friends? Tatsumaki asked, suddenly. That guy, yeah, me and him go way back. Friends since elementary. One of my only ones. Saitama said. That's sad, Tatsumaki said, though she could understand his plight. After all, she had the same situation happen to her, during her elementary school days. I'd prefer a few good friends I can trust over a bunch of friends who I can't. Saitama said, his smile growing a bit smaller. So anyway, where do you live? He asked. Tatsumaki said, not really sure of what to say. Oh, I get it. Don't worry, you can stay over at my place. Tatsumaki stopped dead in her tracks. Stay over with a stranger? No, absolute fucking way, but he was so nice to her, so she couldn't flat out deny his offer. Well, it's just that, she said, struggling to think of a good answer. It's fine, I said I got it already. Come on, at least let me get some new clothes for you. How could this man understand her so easily? Tatsumaki prided herself on being able to hide her feelings, yet it was like he was reading them off her sleeve. Years of being forced by the scientists in those wretched labs had made her good at hiding her emotions. If she cried, they increased the drugs. If she grew angry, they increased the voltage. If she smiled, they increased the intensity. Expressionless. That's what they wanted, and that's what they made her. Well, except for now. Apparently, Saitama was as good as reading emotions as she was at hiding them. Half an hour later they arrived at his apartment. Tatsumaki was close to dropping, her legs incredibly tired. While she could use her powers to lift herself up, she didn't want to be seen, to be recaptured by the scientists. We're here, my humble abode. Saitama smiled. It was quite humble indeed. A small apartment complex lay out in front of them, only 2 stories tall. It didn't look the most welcoming, either. The concrete was cracked, the windows dirty and opaque. The doors were made of metal, which did not bode well with Tatsumaki. Regardless, she made her way inside, to find a simplistic room with little furniture. A TV in the corner, some mats on the ground, and a small kitchen. She guessed in an apartment like this, an all-in-one room minus the washroom, of course, was necessary. Now, where could it be? Saitama said, rummaging through some cardboard boxes. He had set Fubuki down onto a mat of some sort, where she lay soundly asleep. Here we go, Saitama said, lifting out a small black dress. It was quite the dainty thing, and actually wasn't half bad. The bottom separated in a couple thick straps of cloth, that actually were quite long. Tatsumaki wondered why he would even have such a thing. Where did you get that? She asked, perplexed. This. I found it while I was jogging, and I couldn't just let such a good piece of clothing go to waste. I thought it was a lot bigger though, but for you it seems like a good fit. Hey, I'm not that small, Tatsumaki said, but the malice in her words was severely toned down. She couldn't bring herself to snap at him. She picked up the dress and admired it. It seemed to be clean, and was quite soft. Truly, it had no place in an apartment like this. Showers in the other room. Go and wash up, Saitama said. Fubuki was still asleep. That complicated things. Tatsumaki didn't want to spend the night here, but she couldn't move Fubuki without using her powers, which would only draw attention to her. Shit. Regardless, she wasn't going to pass up on a shower. Her body was all icky and grimy from weeks of sleeping out in the open, and traveling around. Tatsumaki stepped out of the shower, her hair back to its nice curly state, and her body thoroughly clean. She was dressed up in the black dress, and to her surprise the black strips of cloth at the bottom went down to her feet. While it showed a lot of her body, specifically her thighs and a bit of her hips, she couldn't help but admire herself in the mirror. She liked this dress a lot. Though, she needed to get out here. Lord knows what Saitama was planning to do when she was asleep. In her haste, she accidentally tripped. Saitama caught her, and she sank into his arms. Why were they so soft and comforting? He was warm, really warm. She could feel her eyes closing. Oh yeah, it was late in the night. Or you could say early in the morning. No wonder why she was so tired. She nuzzled his chest, desperate to get more of that heavenly warmth. Her eyes cracked open as she realized what she was doing, but looking up all she saw was Saitama's warm smile, empty of malice. He was the first one to smile at her that way. And, for some reason, she just couldn't move. She tried pulling back, but her body refused to move. He was so warm and comforting, that she began to fall asleep, the warning bells in her head being ignored. Her eyes slowly closed. Saitama chuckled as the first snore hit him. Laying Tatsumaki down onto his futon, he flopped backwards onto the hard floor. Whatever, sleeping on hard surfaces was a good thing, right? Saitama looked over at the sisters. He didn't expect them to stay long, and in fact expected them to be gone before he even woke up. Whatever, though, he helped out some people today, and that had made him happy. Almost made a friend, too, he thought. Too bad she would be gone the next day. Time skip. So, what do you even do for money? Tatsumaki asked. It had been a week after their fateful encounter, and Tatsumaki seriously was considering making a break for it as soon as she woke up the first day. But something told her to stay, and that was the best sleep she ever had. Even better than her carefree days, when she was young and her parents weren't assholes, yet. In fact, she didn't even have nightmares that night. Instead, it was a calm, blissful sleep. Fubuki was pretty shocked when she woke up, though after some careful explaining she hesitantly agreed to stay. Then Saitama woke up a couple minutes later, and greeted her well. He didn't mention anything of what transpired the other night, just that he'd met Tatsumaki after beating up the criminal. Tatsumaki appreciated him for that. I usually beat up criminals and monsters. Sometimes they have a bounty, so it's a nice reward. Tatsumaki's eyes widened. So what happened that first night wasn't a one-time thing, eh? So you're a hero. Well, a self-proclaimed one, I guess. I used to just be a businessman, but one day I came from a job interview and there was this kid. He was being attacked by a crab monster. At first, I didn't care, but for some reason I wanted to protect the kid. He had so much potential, you know. So somehow, I killed the crab monster, and that's how my hero business started. That's nice of you, Tatsumaki said. She had to respect that this man, with nothing special in particular, was going around and saving people. Then you look at her, she had this great power, and did jack other than stealing food. Ah, it's good training and testing. I do 100 push-ups, sit-ups and squats and then a 10 kilometers run every day. It's good to see I'm improving. Tatsumaki raised her eyes at that. Even with her limited understanding, she knew he shouldn't be able to withstand that regimen without breaks. Yet, he said every day. Perhaps there was something special to him. Suddenly, a poster flew out of the blue and smacked him the face. Tatsumaki snorted. Huh, a reward for a monster. Saitama said, eyes widening. The poster turned out to be a wanted poster, for some kind of lizard guy that went around robbing convenience stores. Tatsumaki saw him salivating as he read the reward. 80,000 yen. That's a lot of money. I can pay the rent. Saitama said, excited. Come on, let's go. Huh, he wanted her to come. Well, might as well. Through her weeks surviving with Fubuki, she had honed her powers a little. She had some offensive capabilities. Of course, none of that mattered when you were too paralyzed by fear to focus. Tatsumaki mentally scolded herself for what happened that night. Though in her defense, she thought Fubuki had died. So, maybe she wasn't so bad. Hue, hand over the money. The lizard man yelled at the cashier. Fear written all over her face, She quickly handed over the money. Thanks for the cash, the lizard monster yelled, tongue slobbering all over the place. He quickly ran out of the store. Someone help, a bystander yelled, though he himself did nothing. Stop, Saitama yelled, tackling the monster. The monster cursed as he fell to the ground. While he was quite humanoid in appearance, his long tongue and green skin easily gave him away. Silly human, I, lizard dude, am the greatest robber known to all mankind. He boasted, punching Saitama. Saitama grunted and fell backwards. Shooting his tongue out, he grabbed Saitama by the neck and lifted him up. The tongue constricted around Saitama's neck, slowly choking him. Saitama tried to pry the tongue off, but it was far too slimy and tough. You ruined my money, and for that, you must pay. The money bag lay on the ground, covered in spit. Most of the money was drenched in lizard dude's disgusting saliva. Dude, you did that why yourself? Saitama said, choking. Shut up, I, the greatest robber, would never ruin my loot. Lizard dude said, even though he clearly just did. The greatest robber wouldn't have such a stupid name like that, Tatsumaki said, suddenly stepping forward. Huh, a little girl, well, you might make a tasty meal, lizard dude said, turning around to face her. A vein popped on Tatsumaki's forehead. I'm not a girl, or little, she yelled. Growling, she shot her arm out. A green hue surrounded lizard dude's body, and his tongue dropped Saitama. Lizard dude couldn't move. How? Lizard dude said, stunned. Not so little now, huh? Tatsumaki smirked, floating up to reach his height. Her hand closed into a fist, causing lizard dude to scream. His head began to shrink. He kept screaming out in pain for a couple seconds before his head suddenly exploded, sending his eyeballs and chunks of his head flying everywhere. Yuck, hopefully they take headless corpses as well, Tatsumaki muttered. Wow, thanks a lot Tatsumaki, Saitama said, as they made their way back from the police station. It was nothing. Tatsumaki shrugged, though pride ran through her body. She didn't actually expect to do that either, she was just planning on getting the lizard dude to drop Saitama. Turns out she was a lot more powerful than she thought. That knowledge gave her confidence. Nothing. That was so cool. You made his head explode, Saitama said, grinning. Whatever, thanks, Tatsumaki said, though her face was flushed red with his praise. She watched him count the money for the 5th time, chuckling to herself. Well, they would definitely eat something nice tonight. Oni-chan, Fubuki called, running out to greet them. Tatsumaki was surprised. Usually, she just stayed indoors. Something happened. That's a bummer, Saitama said, as they soaked in the news. It showed footage of a burning car crash. And while medics and firefighters are on the scene, the only people managed to be rescued came from the other car. The bodies found from the limo were burned to a crisp. The news lady said solemnly. Fubuki, look away, Tatsumaki commanded, as it zoomed in on the burnt corpses. What? I'm not fragile, Fubuki yelled. I can watch. Shish, I wanna hear what they're saying, Saitama said, putting his finger to his lips. Tatsumaki was about to retort when words rang out in her ears that she'd never thought she'd hear again. Unfortunately, these bodies were identified to be none other than Mrs. and Mr. Senritsu, who were influential millionaires. The spokesperson for their company, Senritsu Imports, has made a statement. Tatsumaki ignored the rest of what the news lady was saying. Her parents were dead. She wasn't sure if she was happy, sad, or didn't care. They deserved that car crash, deserved being burned to a crisp. But knowing that Fubuki now was her only family in this harsh world. Well, that's good, Saitama suddenly said. Fubuki and Tatsumaki both said, shocked. Fubuki choked on the glass of water she was drinking. He was glad their parents died. Well, don't take it that way. But they treated you guys pretty poorly, right? Both Esper sisters nodded. And they were rich. Both Esper sisters nodded again. Well, they probably have a will somewhere, with you guys on it. So maybe you'd get to inherit their riches. Fubuki and Tatsumaki looked at each other with widened eyes. Holy shit. Time skip. So Fubuki's finalizing it, Saitama said, walking down the street with Tatsumaki floating with him. With Fubuki going to the funeral and being recognized on the will, there was no point hiding anymore. Plus, with the money they got from beating the lizard dude, they managed to get a nice dress for Fubuki so she didn't look like she had spent over a decade being experimented on. Soon, Tatsumaki's life would change, as her parents' wealth would be transferred to the two sisters. Though, she wasn't sure what they would do. Yeah, I'm not too savvy in the business side of things. Tatsumaki shrugged, lifting a pebble with her powers. It had been 2 months since they first met, and both of them trained together every day. While Saitama jogged and did his physical exercise, Tatsumaki focused on improving her psychic abilities. She had seen drastic change, getting immensely more powerful every day. Now, exploding a monster's head was baby food for her. Perhaps that was the silver lining from all the experiments she partook in. Gra, give all your money to me, or I, rambunctious rabbit, will cleave you in half. A giant rabbit said, hopping out of an alleyway suddenly. I wanted to be a rabbit so badly I turned into one. And now I have this giant carrot to boot. The rabbit monster said, waving around a carrot sword. Let me take care. Tatsumaki was cut off by the look on Saitama's face. He had a crazed look, with drool coming out of one side of his mouth. I thought I recognized you somewhere. You're on one of the wanted posters. Saitama said, grinning. Eh? The rabbit monster said, raising a big eyebrow. Tatsumaki chuckled at the scene that was about to unfold. The poor rabbit monster didn't even know what hit him as Saitama pounced on him, snatching the massive carrot sword from his grasp. Ha ha ha, the reward money will be mine. Saitama said, eyes filled with determination and fire as he cleaved off the rabbit's arm with one big swing. Saitama swung again, but this time the rabbit grabbed the sword, and with one swift kick to the stomach, launched Saitama back into a wall. The wall was cratered from the force, but thankfully Saitama's training appeared to be having an effect. Saitama gasped in pain but quickly got up, wiping some blood from his mouth. Glad you can fight back, I need some combat training anyway. You fool, boomed the rabbit, though his voice was shaky. I am the rambunctious rabbit. Though I am strong and powerful, my reward isn't even that much. It's only 200,000 yen. 200,000 yen, that's more than I remember what the poster said. Saitama said, his grin growing even wider. The rabbit paled. Shit. Tatsumaki shook her head as she watched Saitama beat the living hell of the rabbit monster. Never change, Saitama. Tatsumaki smiled inwardly. Woo, I'm rich, Saitama said, grinning like an idiot. He pumped his fist a couple times in the air, celebrating another month of paid rent. Tatsumaki just rolled her eyes at her friend's antics. Wait, friend. She just called him a friend. She never really had a friend. Even in elementary school, she was regarded as a freak. Green hair, especially powers. They all called her a witch. And by extension, Fubuki too. They bullied her, and Tatsumaki had to defend Fubuki all the time. Fubuki didn't want to fight back, but Tatsumaki did. She beat up bullies with her immense psychic power. The teachers all hated her, or more accurately, feared her, even though she was the top of every class. Ha ha ha, the witch dropped her book. A crowd of people surrounded her, jeering and pointing. Why don't you just use your mind to pick it up? Huh. Maybe it's cause she doesn't have one. She's just a cheat. Tatsumaki clenched her fists, staring at the ground. She was trying, really, trying to control herself and her powers. But when people do this, how in the hell was she supposed to take it lying down? What's wrong, Thomas? The bully who had tripped her, sneered. Tatsumaki's fists balled up. Gonna cry, Thomas said, leaning in closer. Normally, he would be too scared to do this kind of thing, but he felt emboldened by the crowd. Tatsumaki remained silent. Not gonna respond. That's fine. Maybe your sister will scream when I fuck her. Damn, that girl's got nice tits. Thomas's eyes widened as suddenly, an invisible force gripped his neck, lifting him up in the air. The force tightened as it began to choke him. Thomas's legs flailed usually in the air, his hands wrapped around his neck in an attempt to alleviate the phantom choking. Hell Gurk, she's choking. What's wrong? Tatsumaki said, looking up. Her face was full of anger, and Thomas could feel her eyes melting through him. He felt like he was burning up. Wait. Looking down, he realized he literally was being burned. Gaha! Thomas screamed, as his skin was set alight. He thrashed around widely in the air, but Tatsumaki's psychic power held him tightly. Gonna cry, Tatsumaki mocked. Thomas sobbed, tears going down his cheeks as he realized he could very well die in this situation. The pain was becoming unbearable. Ha! Expect as much from someone like you, Tatsumaki said. Now, who's next, huh? WHO wants to fucking trip me. Huh, see, Mon, you were all so eager in the beginning. WHO wants to fight. Tatsumaki turned around, screaming. Her eyes blazed with pure anger. Half the crowd had fled already, while the other half sat there dumbly, paralyzed by fear. One of them even pissed himself. Tatsumaki dropped Thomas and he fell to the floor curled up in a ball, sobbing. The fire had subsided, but there were 2 nasty burn marks on his chest. After that, no one bothered with Tatsumaki, or even interacted with her. That was fine. She didn't need anyone, other than her sister. Tatsumaki was scolded by the teachers and given detention for the rest of the school year. That was fine. She could study in the meanwhile. Knowledge is power. Tatsumaki would graduate at the top of the school by a huge margin, yet when she came onto the stage to accept her awards, not a single person clapped, even her sister. Hey Tats, I was thinking, isn't it your birthday? Huh, Tatsumaki said, shaking her head. I said, isn't it your birthday? Why don't I treat you to something? Saitama said. My birthday, really? Hey, I told you not to call me that. Tatsumaki didn't really keep track of her birthday. After all, she didn't need to, or get to, in the 10+ years she spent in that cursed laboratory. Sheesh, sorry Tats. Anyway, Fubuki told me it was your birthday today. Of course, Fubuki would remember something like that. Tatsumaki smiled inwardly, thanking her sister. Oi, I thought I told you not to call me that, Tatsumaki said, processing the sentence. She threw a pebble at Saitama's face, bouncing harmlessly off his forehead. Ow. Well, anyway, there's a circus nearby. Maybe we could go get some treats. Quote. Sure. Never really got to experience one. Whoa, really, I know this one, they have the best caramel apples. Never had one. Well, there's a first for everything. Like being called Tats. Hey, what was I saying? Tatsumaki yelled. Saitama sheepishly scratched his head, wearing a shit-eating grin. Tatsumaki sighed. He never gave up, huh? Too bad she couldn't force herself to say it with any anger, though. That's probably why he kept pushing. Well, I mean, what's the point of having friends if you can't give each other nicknames? Saitama said, with a raised eyebrow. Friends. Huh, that funny word again. Though, if she could call Saitama a friend, perhaps that wouldn't be that bad. Saitama, are we friends? Yes, aren't we good friends? Why, what's wrong? Nothing. Tatsumaki closely scrutinized Saitama. Relaxed, nice, honest, the list of good attributes went on and on. She felt happy, content, even at peace, just being near him. Sure, he had his downsides. But to call him a friend, and to be her first, not bad. Not bad at all. Chapter 2. Thanks for the reviews. Fixed some divider bars not showing up in Chapter 1. You know, for being small, you sure can eat a lot. Saitama said, as they walked down the various paths in the Carnival. Quiet, Tatsumaki said, digging into her 5th caramel apple. These utterly delicious treats found their way straight to her heart. She simply couldn't stop eating them. Geez, you're like a druggie who's gone a couple days without a snort. Shut up. Honestly, Tatsumaki never really was one for food. She ate what she had, and even in her privileged youth, she didn't pay too much attention to the lavish dishes her personal chef had cooked. As long as it didn't taste like cardboard or have the consistency of spackling, she was fine. But these caramel apples, they were motherfucking delicious. The sweet, sticky caramel on the outside followed by the slightly sour taste of the green apples blended perfectly to create, what was in her mind, the only food worthy enough to be called her favorite. Each bite was heavenly, the juices of the apple squirting out into her mouth. If euphoria or pleasure could be described in a food, These caramel apples were the perfect example. She'd thanked Saitama eventually for introducing these to her. Sheesh, that's the fifth one toast. I haven't even started on mine, Saitama said, looking at his caramel apple. Originally, he bought one for each of them, but as soon as he saw Tatsumaki ravenously devouring the first, he ordered 4 more. Though, now he wished he ordered a dozen instead. The discount offered would have been nice. With a small burp, Tatsumaki polished off her last apple, licking the stick that it was once impaled on. You full now, Saitama said, sitting down at a tree. It was next to a small river, with the tree's branches hanging low. Some looked like they could touch the river. Here, the hub-hub of the carnival faded away to the peaceful sounds of the wind shaking the branches, and the occasional chirp of a bird. Tatsumaki flopped down next to Saitama, wanting to take a break from all the walking. Ironically, she was floating during the entire walk. She looked at the collection of sticks floating next to her, the only remnants of the caramel apples she had massacred. Maybe, she responded, though she began to stare at Saitama's apple from the corner of her eye. Saitama studied the fat fishes swimming slowly through the river. The entire scene looked picture perfect. He was surprised no one else was here. Closing his eyes, he laid his head back against the tree and began to wonder if he was allowed to fish here. Feeling an odd promotion, he cracked his eye open and was shocked to see his apple slowly lifting off the stick. Saitama eyed his caramel apple, then looked over at Tatsumaki. Caught off guard, she quickly looked away from him. The green glow ceased around his apple. Looking back and forth between the two, Saitama chuckled. Then, he suddenly bit down into the apple, causing Tatsumaki to pout. Come on, don't be so greedy. You've had like what, 5 now? Saitama said, poking her belly. I wouldn't want you to get fat, you know. Hey, Tatsumaki said, slapping away his hand. Who are you calling fat? Saitama sighed, turning back to face the river. This apple was good, but he wasn't in the mood for it suddenly. Welp, what a waste of food. Well, guess the fishes are going to be eating well, he said, raising his arm to chuck the apple in the river. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed Tatsumaki staring at his apple again. You know, I bit it already. Tatsumaki continued to stare at the apple. Her eyes seemed to beg Saitama, and they were so irresistibly cute, he felt himself slowly melting. Wait a minute, were those puppy eyes? Are you that desperate? Saitama said, in a bid to keep the apple away from her. He couldn't resist such a cute gaze for long. It's worth it. Tatsumaki stared up at his face, giving the best puppy eyes she could. Normally, she would never stoop this low. But, the apples were worth it. Plus, she knew he was close to breaking, judging by the twitching of his face. Saitama seemed to ponder for a second, before giving a sigh of defeat. Fine. Giving a squeal of victory, Tatsumaki yoinked the apple from his hands and began to hungrily devour it. Holy shit, remind me never to buy caramel apples for her ever again. She's gonna drain the entire carnival, Saitama thought, as he watched her annihilate the apple. He had to admit she was very cute whilst eating the apples. Eating the last apple in record time, she licked the stick clean before adding it to her collection. The 6th stick floated lazily to join its brethren, a small pile of sticks suspended in the air. You better be full now, Saitama said, poking her belly again. It was soft and a little squishy. Saitama was honestly surprised it wasn't bloated with all the apples she ate. Fuck off, she said, burping again, though she didn't slap away his hand. Giving a sigh of contentment, she leaned against Saitama's shoulder. His shoulder was so comfy and cozy, she began to close her eyes. Her tummy was full, her taste buds were pleased, and her mind was at rest. This peaceful feeling was nice. Saitama wrapped his arm around her, drawing her in. Tatsumaki gave a murmur of appreciation and nuzzled up closer to his side. Absent-mindedly playing with her hair as he watched the fish meander about, he relaxed as he enjoyed the peaceful silence. 10 minutes later, just when Saitama thought she'd fallen asleep, Tatsumaki suddenly began to speak. Hey Saitama. Yeah, thanks. Saitama smiled, ruffling her head. Soon, her snores were audible to Saitama's ear. Sighing, he closed his eyes for a quick nap. Then, 30 minutes later, he woke up and carried her back to his house, Tatsumaki still sound asleep. Flashing thunder. A bolt of energy hit the ground nearby, splintering a tree in half. Fubuki's cries intensified as Tatsumaki tried to shush her. Shush, it's gonna be alright, I'll find a way out of this. Except she likely couldn't. What had those scientists said? Experiment to see if she could manipulate her energy. What the fuck was that supposed to mean? She'd already shown them how she could move objects and fling them around. Fuck them. Fuck them all. Who in their right minds would think dropping a fucking 15-year-old and her sister into a fucking forest, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a fucking thunderstorm would be a great idea? A heavy gust of wind blew through, causing Tatsumaki's hair to blow back. It was painfully cold. Fire. That's what they needed, but she couldn't just fucking conjure a fireball out of nothing. She'd need to catch the lightning, somehow. The two sisters hid in their small shelter, a bunch of sticks and leaves all held together by Fubuki's psychic energy. While that was incredibly easy for Tatsumaki to do, her sister had volunteered to hold the shelter together while Tatsumaki searched for a way to harness a lightning bolt. After all, her sister was slightly straining to keep the shelter together. There was no way she could handle the immense power of a lightning bolt. It would be fine for the both of them if they weren't hungry, cold, and soaking wet. The wind was incredibly rough and powerful. It was almost like they were next to a tornado. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning arced right at them. Unconsciously, Tatsumaki raised her arm. A green hue surrounded the lightning bolt, stopping it in its tracks. Normally, Tatsumaki would have been dumbfounded, but she needed to focus. She didn't want both of them to get obliterated. However, this lightning bolt was proving a lot tougher than she thought. Grunting, her forehead began to sweat as she focused all her psychic output into stopping the lightning bolt. If she let it touch the ground, the reaction would be complete and she and Fubuki would both be killed. The green hue began to increase in intensity as more and more layers of energy wrapped around it. There were so many layers of energy being wrapped on that it almost resembled a physical barrier. However, the quality of the barrier was not good enough, regardless of the amount of layers. Tatsumaki's eyes shot open as her barrier began to crack. No, she thought desperately, but it was to no avail. Slowly but surely, the cracks spread. Come on, Tatsumaki, think, she told herself, scrambling to get something, anything, to counter the lightning. Suddenly, an idea popped into her mind. It would be hard to pull off, since it would take a lot of her energy to pull off. All of her energy was currently invested into the barrier that was slowly failing. She would have but a millisecond to pull off her maneuver. Luckily, that's all she needed. Suddenly ceasing to hold the barrier, the lightning bolt surged forward, only to be met with a beam of energy. A brilliant flash lit up the air, followed by a thunderous crack. The lightning dissipated everywhere, lighting up the sky in a spiderweb of energy. Tatsumaki fell to her knees, panting. Finally, in order to counter the lightning, she sent out a bolt of energy directly into it, blocking the deadly bolt. But it had cost her a lot in terms of mental energy. Little did she know, at that moment she had found out how to create and control pure energy out of sheer mental power. Later on in the night, she would figure out how to circumvent the second law of thermodynamics. Then, she would figure out how to create a tornado. With a gasp, Tatsumaki woke up. She was currently sleeping on the futon she'd come to know over the past months. Looking around, she noticed Fubuki and Saitama sitting on the mat, staring at the TV. Wow, look at that. The monster can shoot lightning, Saitama said, looking at the news channel. The TV screen displayed a hulking red beetle beast, red horns adorning his head. These horns were crackling with energy, and every once in a while they shot out vicious cracks of lightning. The news chopper swerved to avoid a log that the creature had thrown at it. Hey look, it's pretty close. Wanna try to do something about it? Saitama said, turning around and facing Tatsumaki. Tatsumaki said, a bit caught off guard and also unnerved. How'd he know she woke up? As if reading her mind, Saitama answered. Well, you were panting and sweating like crazy. Thought you were sick for a sec. Fubuki told me it was a nightmare, so I let you be. Tatsumaki groaned and clutched her head. She thought she'd repressed those memories of her in the lab, but with this nightmare they all came flooding back. The syringes, the tests, the head device, all of it. Damn it, Tatsumaki said, pounding the ground. She didn't want to remember anything, but the memories kept flooding her head. Sis, Fubuki yelled, running over and hugging her. It was a tight, warm embrace that only family members could give. It's going to be all right, we're out of there, Fubuki said, whispering it into Tatsumaki's ear like a mantra. Tatsumaki began to sob as the memories that she worked so hard to repress her in her head all began to flood back. Every time she had a nightmare, this happened. The pain, the experiments, the torture. She had a sinking feeling that these memories wouldn't ever go away. Don't be shy, it's just one needle. Don't you want more vitamins to grow big and strong? These pills shouldn't kill you. Probably. Good girl, here's a candy. But first, can you beat that monster? Suddenly, she felt another hand on her head, snapping her out of the destructive trance. Looking up, she saw Saitama gently smiling at her. Come on, there's a monster's ass we need to kick. He might even have a bounty. Despite the memories in her head, Tatsumaki chuckled. Saitama gently patted her head and she took deep shuddering breaths, her tears no longer falling. She stayed silent for another 30 seconds, gathering her thoughts. She suddenly began getting up. Her eyes were red but no fresh tears streamed down them. Let's do this. Tatsumaki was shocked at how much knowledge she had lost when she had repressed her memories. Circumventing the second law of thermodynamics. Creating heat from nothing. Shooting energy balls. Holy shit, that was a plethora of incredibly useful knowledge she'd locked away. One day, she'll go and sift through those memories. One day. Right now, they were here to kick some monster ass. I am Beetle Blaster. You two could do nothing to my immense power. The beetle cackled. It stared at the two humans at the end of the road, one a short midget and the other a normal man. The midget looked special, after all she was floating. The man, however, would be baby food. Raising a heavy arm, he swung at the man. His hand began to glow yellow before firing a blast of energy straight at the guy. A huge explosion erupted as it made contact, creating a crater the size of a car. Ha ha ha, as I said, you are no match. Beetle Blaster boasted. He thumped his chest proudly. I loved beetles and electricity so much, I became a beetle. Then I ate a car battery and I gained electric powers. He bragged, before turning to the green midget. Now it's your turn, little girl. Hey, she's not a girl. A voice to his right said. Beetle Blaster's eyes bulged out of his head as he saw the man standing next to him. No way, it's the guy from before. He thought, before his head swiftly snapped to the side. Saitama had thrown a mean right hook. Look, you can't just go on a rampage cause you ate a car battery. Saitama said, pounding Beetle Blaster's face. He gave a flurry of punches, each making a resounding thwack. As they landed. Right, left, his punches continued one after another. With a powerful kick, he launched Beetle Blaster away. With a loud crunch, he slammed into a parked car. Saitama panted, putting his hands on his knees. That combo took a lot out of him, but hopefully it was enough to take the monster out. Impressive, you managed to crack my beautiful armor. But it won't matter, when you're dead, Beetle Blaster said, turning his head and getting up. Sure enough, there was a big crack on the side of his head, and a piece of his vertebrae had fallen off, revealing his tender flesh underneath. It won't matter though, cause you're dead, he screamed, slamming his two fists together. Lightning ray, he screamed, his fists glowing, combing their energy to fire a devastating ray. A wide yellow beam blasted out of his hands. Beetle Blaster smiled and he saw his death beam race towards the man. His smile widened as a massive explosion erupted. Wait, that explosion was early, way too early. Turning around, he looked at the midget floating nearby. Her arm was outstretched, and small bits of energy crackled around her hands. She had countered his powerful move with barely any effort. Oh, you have energy, perhaps I'll eat you too. Beetle Blaster grinned, before charging at her. Before he made a single step, however, his head was blasted off by a massive beam of energy. Get fucked. Who's the little one, now huh? Tatsumaki said, watching his body hit the ground with a thump. She started floating over to where Saitama was standing. Saitama had dodged the explosion with seemingly no injuries. To his body, of course. He stood silent, his clothes torn and ripped. His face was downcast and he seemed ready to drop to his knees. Tatsumaki was prepared for what was about to happen. Good dammmmmmmittttttttttt. Saitama screamed, dropping to his knees and pounding his fists on the ground. Maybe you should invest in stronger hero clothes, Tatsumaki remarked, as Saitama walked out of the clothing store for possibly the 10th time. Saitama shook his head. If I were to abandon my tracksuit, people would no longer recognize me. You know, when I first started this hero stuff, the cops were called on me a lot. They thought I was a thug or something. Saitama chuckled. Saitama pulled the receipt of his pocket, wincing as he read the prices. He sighed and put it back into his pocket. At least I'm supporting local businesses. He smiled. And, it seems like people are recognizing me more. At least, the cops don't come knocking at my door that often anymore. Tatsumaki scoffed. The amount of times the cops came around, searching for a supposed delinquent. They were like a bunch of pesky flies. They even had the nerve to think Fubuki and Saitama were married. And that she was their daughter. Tatsumaki huffed at the thought of Fubuki and Saitama being married. She should be instead. Wait, what? Before she could realize and fully process what she just thought, Saitama interrupted her thoughts. Look, a cat. He pointed at Grey Tabby nearby. It hissed at him before running away. Ha, it hates you already. Tatsumaki smirked. What can I say? I'm magical with animals. Saitama spread his arms wide, causing all the nearby birds to fly away. Tatsumaki floated blankly in Saitama's apartment, deep in thought. Soon, she would be moving to her new home, a lavish penthouse in City A. She felt a pang of sorrow. This apartment had been her home for the past few months. While it wasn't the best, it was livable, and plus, Saitama was here. She would miss him, even if she visited him regularly. Her blank face turned into a frown. Saitama interrupted her thoughts. Get over here, he said, grabbing her by the waist and yanking her with him onto the floor. Tatsumaki yelped as he crushed her in a hug. Let me go, you creep, she said, thrashing around in his grip. Ah, come down, you just seemed like you needed a hug. Don't tell me that grumpy face was for nothing, Saitama said, poking her cheek. Sitting cross-legged, he plopped Tatsumaki in his lap. One of his arms was still around her waist. Tatsumaki grumbled something about murder but didn't move. She blamed it on his incredibly comfortable body. Fubuki sat with them, as they began to watch the news. Wow, it seems like things are just getting worse and worse. Remember when just one monster was a massive thing? Fubuki said, staring at the screen. The news lady was babbling something about a new tornado monster, and how it was wreaking havoc in City J. Saitama nodded. Now it seems like they come every other week. Every other week. We killed 4 this month, dimwit, Tatsumaki said, leaning back into Saitama's chest. Shush, Saitama said, beginning to stroke her hair. Tatsumaki was about to retort, but then she closed her mouth and just sat there. She kept telling herself that no, she didn't enjoy him stroking her hair, it was just simply too much effort to get him to stop. Whoa, he's flinging the cars like they're nothing, Fubuki commented, seeing the tornado violently pick up objects and throw them around with ease. She winced as she noticed a man being flattened by a car in the background. Sheesh, looks like he's the one responsible for that storm as well, Saitama pointed out. The sky was very dark and stormy, and in the background they could see heavy objects flying around. Occasionally, there was a blast of lightning. PFF'd. I could deal with tornadoes just as easy as lightning, Tatsumaki said, her mind flashing back to that core memory. Tatsumaki and Fubuki huddled around the fire she had conjured. It was quite odd, seeing a ball of fire just floating in the air, but both were grateful for the heat. Personally, Tatsumaki was proud. She'd managed to conjure fire out of nothing. It had taken her some fiddling about, but nonetheless she did it. While the lightning stopped, the wind seemed to only increase in intensity. A massive gust of wind blew by, rattling the makeshift shelter. Fubuki winced as her mind was strained. You okay, Nei-san? I can hold the shelter now, if you want. Tatsumaki said. No, it's good for my mind to get exercise like this. I gotta catch up to you, you know. Fubuki said, chuckling. Tatsumaki frowned. Look, I'm not that strong. It's just the tests, the drugs, you know. Though in the back of her mind, she knew that wasn't true. She was born powerful, a prodigy. While she didn't know it at the time, she had figured out how to manipulate energy and create heat, in just minutes. These would have taken most normal espers years, if not decades, to learn. She was learning incredibly hard concepts in the especially world at an unparalleled pace, mastering them like they were nothing. Her physic output also rivaled the current strongest in the world, and it was rapidly growing. Couple that with her genius brain and you have one powerful monster, if not a god. Another intense gust of wind came through, rattling the shelter again. The fireball flickered before resuming its glow. Something was up. The gusts were both increasing in severity and the intervals between each were getting shorter. Something was coming. Nei-san, hold this fireball for me, Tatsumaki said, making her way outside. Oh Oni-chan, Fubuki cried, reaching out for Tatsumaki. But it was too late. Staring out into the dark, stormy night, she could find no trace of green hair. Sighing, Fubuki held the fireball closer, basking in its warmth. Hopefully, whatever Tatsumaki was dealing with was an animal of some sort. Then, they could eat. She would be able to deal with it, right? Oni-chan could deal with anything. Fubuki hoped. Fuck, Tatsumaki yelled as a massive log was thrown at her from behind. Quickly, a green hue enveloped the log and it stopped in place, the tip inches from her head. She was in a bad situation. A bad situation. While she was holding this huge log, she was also keeping in place a large boulder and hundreds of tiny, sharp splinters. If she let go of any, the intense wind would blow them right into her. Now, normally this wouldn't be that hard for her. But they were all in different directions, and the wind was so powerful that she was actually beginning to strain under the stress of keeping all of the objects perfectly still. Shit, she cursed as she accidentally let hold of a couple dozen splinters. As if they were shot from a bow, the splinters flew past her at breakneck speeds. Closing her eyes just in time, a couple splinters raked her face, leaving long, angry gashes. Her body wasn't spared, either. Tens of splinters pierced her clothing, the ones passing by on the side leaving bleeding nicks and scratches. A chance few had directly embedded themselves inside her. Searing pain rushed through her body, and in that second she lost control. Ducking her head, she heard the swish of the boulder traveling over where her head had been. It collided with the log, showering wood chips everywhere. Unfortunately, when she lost control, that meant she lost control of everything. Like, for instance, the energy around her deflecting the powerful wind. Tatsumaki hurtled around at incredible speeds. She had no control over where she was going. All she knew was that she was hurtling around this wretched forest, and any collision would certainly equal death. Like a rag, she was blown around like nothing. She began to get dizzy from all the ups and downs, the occasional flips and the spinning. She couldn't see, or sense which direction she was facing. She was helpless. It wasn't supposed to end this way. She'd always envisioned a nice bed to die on, with her mourning sister by her side. Or, even better, her sister would die at the same time with her, so that she didn't suffer. Or was that being selfish? As Tatsumaki awaited her death, an unknown determination began to fill her. What was she thinking? While she flew around waiting to die, Fubuki was cold, helpless and starving. Maybe she wanted to die, but did Fubuki? No, she wasn't about to take responsibility for Fubuki's death. As long as she was alive, no harm would come to her. Luckily, it would appear that the wind was starting to follow a pattern of some sort, as she was no longer being jostled about randomly. No, it appeared to be following a circular pattern. Circular pattern? That's weird. Tatsumaki swore it reminded her of something, but what exactly? Suddenly, a cloud of wood chips flew into her face, blanketing her hair with. Coughing and sputtering, she spat out a bunch of chips that had flown into her mouth. A couple seconds later, she felt something wet hit the back of her head, along with a bunch of chips. What the fuck? Then it hit her. She was in a freaking tornado. She began to quell her rising panic. Nothing bad was happening so far, other than her being spun enough to make her vomit 100 times over. She was actually quite glad she hadn't eaten anything recently. She would rather not have projectile vomit covering the back of her head. Well, as fate would have it, she noticed out of the corner of her eye that there was in fact a large forest that was rapidly approaching. Or was the tornado approaching the forest? Probably the latter. Forests meant logs. Tornado meant logs would hit her. Logs hitting her was bad. She'd need to get rid of this tornado, ASAP. A lot easier said than done. What could she do here? Not like she could just set the tornado on fire. That would only change the way she died. Burned to a crisp instead of being broken into pieces. From what she understood, tornadoes were basically just a bunch of wind spinning in a circle, traveling upward. So, if she were to create a counter-tornado, would they cancel out? Author note. Yeah, seems kinda dumb but let's go with it. Grunting, she began to send out her psychic energy, searching for air particles that she could hook onto. She began to drag them in from the outside, creating a packet of air that she could control. To outsiders, nothing was happening. But to anyone with a device that could detect psychic energy, they would find a vast glowing spot in the middle of the air, pun intended. Stopping or controlling the wind outside was too dangerous and tough, but outside air with no force was quite easy. Soon, she had amassed a vast amount. Then, she began to spin them. In her mind, it was like her energy had hooked into the air packet. The energy hooks all stemmed down to a thick chain that connected to her head. She began to move the chain, swinging it in large circles. The air packet had no chance to obey, and thus began to circle around, gaining in speed. Tatsumaki made sure to keep bringing in fresh air. Tornadoes went up and the air that escaped from the top was too hard to control to be worthwhile. Her air packet had enveloped the tornado, fighting it like a wrestler. Both sides pushed back and forth, but only one had Tatsumaki on its side. Almost magically, the tornado began to slow down. It began to spin lazily, eventually thinning down before disappearing entirely. Tatsumaki, no longer suspended in the air, flopped onto the ground harmlessly. Letting go of the psychic chain in her head, she watched as her counter-tornado gently dissipated into nothing. Tatsumaki was exhausted, but she was smiling. Tornadoes were cool, and she had just made one. Looking back, she noticed the trail of destruction the tornado had carved. What had started in as a powerful wind had now cut a thick gap in the clearing. The picture-perfect grass and flowers were all gone. Dirt coated everything in a thin layer. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the boulder that had nearly killed her. Tatsumaki sighed. Well, that was something, she thought. Tatsumaki didn't even realize that she was starting to fall asleep. Saitama and Fubuki's murmuring began to sound so far away and unfocused. Half of her wanted to strain herself to hear what they were saying, but the other half was telling her to stay put. Her eyes began to blink slowly, as if her eyelids were heavy. Next thing she knew, they were closed, and her body told her it was good for them to stay that way. Silently cursing Saitama for being so comfortable and warm, she accepted defeat and embraced her slumber with open arms. Tatsumaki awoke to murmurs from the other two residents in the apartment. She noticed Saitama and Fubuki sitting next to each other, intently watching the TV. Groggily, she got up before making her way to them. What's up? The buildings, Saitama said. Tatsumaki smacked his head. I meant on the TV, dumbass. Fubuki snorted. Oni-chan, seems like the tornado monster hasn't gone away. In fact, it's only gotten bigger. Peering over their heads, she watched the screen with interest. The same news reporter was talking, though this time her dress had shown even more of her large cleavage. Ignoring what she didn't have, Tatsumaki watched as the camera zoomed onto a massive tornado, one rivaling a skyscraper in size. That looks like a problem. A big one. Yeah, look, it's even making buildings fly. I told you they were up. Saitama said. Tatsumaki smacked his head again. Shut up. You know, it's not as big of a problem as that news lady's wardrobe. Fubuki commented, smirking as she felt Tatsumaki tense up. Were they just here to annoy her? Was she just here to suffer? Blushing red, Tatsumaki smacked both of them. You two are absolute idiots, she grumbled, before making her way over to the impromptu dining table. Laid upon it were some noodles in a cup. Typical cheap breakfast, but Tatsumaki never was a foodie anyway. Plus, if everything went to plan today. How's the business going? Tatsumaki asked. Fubuki smiled. Actually, we are good to go today, so, I'm going with our lawyer to fix some stuff, and then by the end of the day we can move into our new home. Wow, I'll miss this apartment, Tatsumaki said, staring around. Really? Saitama asked, surprised. His right eyebrow was raised. Absolutely not. Why would I want to miss a rinky-dink apartment like this? Tatsumaki scoffed, though in the back of her mind she knew this would always have a part in her memories. Fuck you, Saitama, for making me remember this place. Hey, it's not that bad, Saitama said, though he struggled to keep a small smile off his face. What? Tatsumaki asked, confused. You don't mean it, Saitama said, turning back to face the TV. What do you mean? Tatsumaki stuttered, caught off guard. Reading her true thoughts again, so easily. Man, sometimes she hated him. Well, Saitama was caught off by loud screaming coming from the television. Snapping her head towards the screen, Tatsumaki watched in horror as the tornado sucked in the brave news crew on the ground. They disappeared inside the swirling menace, only for a red cloud to appear inside seconds after. Tatsumaki winced. Is no one going to do anything? Fubuki asked, both entranced and horrified at the destruction the tornado was causing. Don't think anyone can, except for vigilantes like us. Maybe though, the police, or military have a big vacuum gun or something. Saitama said. Oh yeah, cause they would totally sink millions of dollars into a giant vacuum. Tatsumaki said, rolling her eyes. Hey, I read that in a manga, you know. Would be pretty cool if they did. Tatsumaki watched the tornado spin haphazardly around City F, approaching the massive gold turd that Zeniru built. Why wasn't that destroyed? If you're going to be a rampaging monster, you might as well do some good for the people and destroy certain eyesores around the city. Looking at the size of the tornado shot excitement through her body. It was massive, certain to prove a challenge. While Saitama struggled, though usually won against the monsters they fought, usually they went down from only one of her energy blasts. She needed to grow, and in order to grow she needed a challenge. Saitama was getting stronger by the day, but it wasn't like he was anywhere close to her raw energy output. She doubted sparring with him would be a good idea. Speaking of which, she noticed that he was currently prepping for his workout routine. She said, shaking her finger. She lifted Saitama and deposited him at the door. Whoa, flying is cool. Can you do that again? Saitama asked. Tatsumaki rolled her eyes. Are your legs broken? Are you incapable of moving? If so, and only then so, will I ever make you fly. But you just did. Shut. Tatsumaki put her finger to her mouth. Where are we even going? Saitama asked, as he trudged along the sidewalk. What do you think? Tatsumaki asked. The udon store to celebrate your new wealth. Saitama asked, hopefulness in his eyes. No, you idiot. Tatsumaki flicked his head, wincing as her finger stung a little. Wow, he actually was getting stronger. Man. Satayama's eyes fell, downcast. Another guess? Tatsumaki asked, knowing full well he was clueless. Nope, you tell me, Saitama said, scratching his head. Well, we're going to fight the tornado. Tatsumaki's grin widened. Time to put her new moves to the test. Fixed and edited Chapter 2 to make more sense. Zeniru panted. His team of bodyguards had barely been able to hustle him out of his skyscraper before the tornado hit. Where was the Hero Association? He hadn't spent loads of cash sponsoring them for nothing. He desperately wished to call them, but right now he needed to get out of here ASAP. Zeniru winced. His precious building. His massive golden turd, which was his pride and glory. Soon, it would be all gone. To his astonishment, he noticed a massive green hue coat his building, shielding it as the tornado enveloped it. Then, the tornado lurched backwards, the middle caving in as something hit it. 2 more hits and the tornado was completely pushed back, with sonic booms bursting out from each hit. Zenitsu dropped to his knees, completely in shock. Alarmed, his bodyguards began to pull on him, yelling into his ear that he needed to go. Zenitsu, however, was paralyzed. As the shockwaves reached him, the intense wind and the shockwaves combined blew his hair back. Flying in his wind, his 52,875 yen toupee blew away, despite his bodyguard's valiant attempts. Zenitsu could only stare at what was happening. What? He said, mouth agape. That is one mean tornado. Saitama said, staring up in the distance. Indeed, the massive skyscraper-sized tornado was currently wreaking havoc all over City F, and no one was stopping it. Fortunately, a certain midget Esper in blue tracksuit wearing man existed. So, how do you want to approach it? Saitama asked. He doubted it was possible for him to reach the center of the tornado without assistance. Tatsumaki had determined that the middle of the tornado was the area most likely to inhabit the tornado monster's true form, so that's where they were going to strike. Tatsumaki shrugged. Suddenly, a light bulb appeared over her head. Hey, remember when I said I would never make you fly? Tatsumaki said, staring off at the tornado. Yeah, but wait, you actually said. Guess it's your lucky day. Tatsumaki said, suddenly lifting up Saitama and flinging him up at the tornado. What the Saitama cheered, flying through the air like a bullet. Of course he would enjoy himself. Tatsumaki facepalmed, before flying up to meet the tornado head-on. Oh right, she suddenly stopped in her tracks, looking at the direction the tornado was heading. The giant golden turd. Might as well save it. She didn't want to deal with rescuing a whole skyscraper's worth of people. Though in the best-case scenario, everyone would have evacuated anyway. However, Tatsumaki wasn't one for taking chances. Casting a powerful bubble shield over the building, she smiled as the tornado had no effect on it. Tatsumaki smirked. This would be so simple. Nearing the center of the tornado, Saitama readied himself, cocking his fist back. As he shot towards the center, the wind grew more and more fierce, as if it were attempting to tear him apart. Fortunately, Tatsumaki's generous gift of flying made him far too fast to be affected, as he shot past all the wind tendrils coming to intercept him. In the center of the tornado was a strangely humanoid-shaped being. His entire body was gray, but his eyes were a bright yellow. Other than that, he had no defining features. No hair, no skin texture. Not even any signs of muscle. If I can deal enough damage quickly enough, I can probably take him out. He doesn't look that resistant to damage. Saitama thought, strength gathering in his fist. He would need to go all out with his next 3 punches, in order to end this tornado as fast as possible. Yeah, he screamed, slamming his fist into the being's stomach. As the being caved backwards from the punch, so did the tornado. A massive sonic boom rocketed out from the punch, ringing Saitama's ears. The being didn't seem to react though, even as Saitama's next punch reached his face. However, the force of his punch was clearly displayed as the tornado was literally pushed back. Once again, Saitama punched his face, giving it his all. With a powerful uppercut, he blew the being in the tornado back a couple dozen meters, the tornado literally shaking as the being in the middle tried to recover from the devastating blow. Unfortunately, from Saitama, the flight he was so generously granted was wearing off. He began to fall, merely inches from the pavement before a green hue enveloped him. Hey, you actually moved him. Good for you. Now, I can get serious. Tatsumaki said, cracking her knuckles. Fools, I am Tornadon. A mafia boss who sought to become a destructive power. After being sucked into a tornado, I fused with it and became one. Tatsumaki winced. His voice sounded bad, really bad. It was like someone who had smoked 3 packs a day and then distorted through a really cheap soundboard. And your punches did nothing. That body inside used to be my shell, but now, after rampaging for a day, I truly am the tornado. Tatsumaki's face fell. Great. She was hoping for a quick and easy blast to the center body. Though she had to agree, the more challenge the better. Looks like I'll have to change my plans. Instead of killing just the center, looks like I'll have to kill all of you. Tatsumaki grinned, charging an energy sphere in her hand. It grew slowly in size, light seemingly being drawn into. Insolent whelp, I'll teach you to disrespect the power of nature. Tornadon bellowed, the tornado seeming to grow in intensity and speed. Out of nowhere, a massive dump truck was hurled at Tatsumaki. Really? That all you got? Tatsumaki said, merely sidestepping the flying truck. Saitama wasn't as lucky though, as he was standing directly in the trajectory of the truck. Grunting, he caught it with both hands as it pushed him into the asphalt. The ground spiderwebbed into cracks and Saitama was pushed down through it. Oops, sorry Saitama, Tatsumaki said, before suddenly whipping her energy ball at a small house that was chucked at her. The house exploded, the parts not vaporized by the blast harmlessly falling onto the ground. Trying to be sneaky? Well, I've had enough. My turn, Tatsumaki said, blasting 5 more energy balls at Tornadon. The balls flew into Tornadon and exploded, leaving brilliant flashes of green light to erupt out of him. However, the skyscraper-sized tornado seemed unharmed. Ha, are you seriously telling me you think you can roast wine? Tornadon bellowed, laughing. You're weaker than I even thought you were. Oh, Tatsumaki said, a vein popping on her forehead. Weak, is that what you think I am? Grunting, Tatsumaki's green hue intensified drastically. Around her, massive chunks of the broken buildings and pavement all began to lift up, slowly coalescing into a huge ball. She almost lost her concentration when a streetlight nearly impaled her. Shit. She forgot that maintaining a solid defense and concentrating on an attack at the same time was really hard. Like, near impossible. Don't worry Tats, I got you. Saitama said, climbing out of the hole he was in. He started picking up pieces of the pavement and chucking it at the incoming objects. Tatsumaki smiled as she diverted the rest of the energy she had spent on maintaining a psychic barrier into creating the now gigantic ball of building materials. With Saitama blocking the incoming projectiles, she could now go all out. The giant ball began to shake and crack as she began to shrink it, solidifying its shape. Soon, it melded into one super dense, super smooth ball. Eat this, she yelled, hurling it at Tornadon. Too busy concentrating fire on Saitama, who had begun to irk him, he was caught off guard by the ball as it hurtled into him. A massive hole was blown inside Tornadon as the ball went through. Remarkably, he appeared to have caught it, though not without obvious damage. Tornadon visibly slowed down as the massive ball was absorbed by him. Incredibly heavy and dense, it required a lot of force to move, slowing him down considerably. Tatsumaki smirked as she noticed Tornadon struggle in his attempts to free himself of the massive ball. What's wrong? Something too big for you to chew? She said idly, resting her head on her hand. Her mouth grew into a big smile. Tornadon was slowing down at an unparalleled pace. The speed and frequency of the projectiles he sent was now laughable. Saitama lazily chuckled a piece of concrete every once in a while to intercept the slow-moving objects. Reminds me of the Carnival, he remarked, picking a chunk of concrete off the side of a ruined building. Tornadon was now almost a husk of his former self. He rotated so slowly that he reminded Tatsumaki more of a leaf falling than a tornado. The storm around Tornadon seemed to dissipate as well. The sky began returning to its normal blue color, the wind slowed down and lightning no longer flashed. Honestly, Tatsumaki was disappointed. How anticlimactic, watching her enemy slowly die from one attack she threw, even if she put a lot of effort into it. Though in all honesty, she was glad it was over. The faster the monster died, the faster she could go check up with Fubuki about her new home. She was pretty excited, going from Saitama's hovel into a high-end apartment. Tats, a voice yelled, shaking her from her thoughts. The wind began to pick up extremely quickly, from almost a quiet whisper to a sudden howl. The sky suddenly grew much darker. Lightning flashed, and racing towards her was the very ball she had sent at Tornadon. Caught off guard, Tatsumaki scrambled to layer herself in protective shields. However, a sinking feeling in her guts told her it was far too late. She cursed herself for getting too cocky. Time almost seemed to slow down as she watched the massive ball hurtle towards her. He had tricked her by conserving his power, to make her think it was over. Then, when her guard was down, he would put all his saved strength into launching that ball at her. Tatsumaki was surprised that Tornadon was that intelligent, and was also feeling pretty stupid. Ironic, how the very thing that she made to kill Tornadon would end up killing her. Would being the keyword. In the blink of an eye, someone was diving in front of her. Saitama. Her eyes widened. No. Then everything went black. Groaning, Tatsumaki opened her eyes. They were in a building of some sort, except it seemed to have collapsed around her. It appeared that she was buried in a pile of rubble. She tried to get up, only to find she couldn't. In fact, she couldn't move at all. Her arms were pinned down and her back was up against a couple pieces of jagged concrete. She would probably feel those cuts soon. Her eyes blinked as they focused. Looking around, she realized what really was holding her down. Saitama's body. It seemed to have caved around the massive ball that was also lying atop of them. In that moment, Tatsumaki remembered the events that had transpired before she blacked out. Dread filled her body. No, she half yelled, half whispered, struggling to lift the massive ball off of both of them. Slowly, inch by inch it lifted upwards before it rolled off of Saitama. Standing up, she lifted up Saitama's body and cradled his head in her arms. His head was bleeding badly, with bruises littering it. That definitely was not a good sign. Looking at his body, she was surprised he wasn't just crushed completely by that ball. Hopefully, that meant his bones didn't break either. Suddenly his eyes shot open, startling Tatsumaki. "Tats, you okay?" he said, calmly. Am I okay? Are you okay?" she shrieked, a tear almost running down her cheek. "You took that ball from me. I thought you died," she said, shaking his body. "Nah, it's all good. In fact, ow, oh shit, that really fucking hurts," Saitama said, making Tatsumaki stop her movements. "Sorry," she said, embarrassed. "I don't think I can move. Damn, that really broke all the bones in my body, didn't it?" Saitama said, wincing with pain. Tatsumaki eyed his body, before ripping off his ruined exercise jacket. She stifled her gasp as she noticed the many bruises dotting his chest. She had to give him credit, she would have died from that ball. Then again, he had abs and strength training and she didn't. In fact, he had really nice abs. Whoa, those were so mesmerizing, she really wanted to touch them. Tats, something wrong," Saitama said, lifting his head up. Nope, nothing at all, just some rest, and you should be fine," Tatsumaki said, blushing. Her voice was a bit hysterical as she truly took into the extent of his injuries. His arms were bending in a way not normally possible. His head was badly bruised and bleeding. So was his chest. His legs looked like they were shredded by a couple hundred glass shards. Probably were. Who was she kidding? A few days of rest and he should be fine. What was she even saying? Tatsumaki chalked it up to being really hopeful that Saitama wouldn't die. "Tats, don't shit me. I know it's bad, but all live," Saitama said, his face growing serious. "You should probably go out and deal with that tornado fuck. He ruined my jacket." Tatsumaki couldn't stifle her chuckle as she shook her head. "I'll make him suffer." Saitama's mouth grew into a tiny smile. Tornadon slowly spun towards the building he had knocked the couple into. Wait, couple, he was pretty sure that girl looked borderline legal, though her face was that of a mature adult. Probably family, then. No way that loser of a guy could get a wife when the great Tornadon couldn't. Though truth be told, most outsiders would often shy away from him when he pointed his many guns at them. He wouldn't admit it, but he was definitely compensating for something. The building they were in was a skyscraper of some sort, probably for some mega corporation. Whatever, he'd bring it down atop of them. Family is buried with family, you know. Tornadon chuckled at his own joke. "The fuck you laughing at, tornado cunt?" a certain, bratty voice said. "How are you alive?" Tornadon asked, perplexed. In fact, the girl only seemed to have a couple scratches on her front. "Impossible. That ball would have been enough to knock over at least a couple skyscrapers." Seems like your brother took the blow for you. He deduced, much to Tatsumaki's chagrin. He's not my brother, you dumb fuck. She said, her face turning red. What, is he a pedophile now? I thought he was a loser, but not that big of a one. Tornadon grinned, if tornadoes could grin, watching Tatsumaki's face redden to a tomato color. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna rip your ass to shreds. Tatsumaki said, her green hue intensifying dramatically. Rip me to shreds. I'm the tornado here, little brat. Tornadon boomed, before spinning far more aggressively. The wind picked up, and huge chunks of destroyed buildings began to circle around him. That's pathetic. Here, let me show you a real tornado. Tatsumaki said, before a massive green tornado appeared out of nowhere and enveloped her. Tornadon unconsciously moved back. He was big, skyscraper big. But the tornado that Tatsumaki had created was ginormous. It was at least 1.5 times his size. Tornadon began to feel uneasy. The odds of winning this went from very likely to downright impossible in an instant. Shit, if he was going to die, he searched the rubble behind Tatsumaki, before finding his target. Quickly and avoiding attention, he pulled the lone man out of the rubble and into his tornado. Tatsumaki was too busy gloating to notice. What's wrong with your voice? Finally shut up after you realized how weak you are. I bet if you had a dick, you'd piss yourself already. Her voice called out from within her tornado. Tornadon knew it was hopeless. He let himself be dragged into her tornado, wincing as he noticed his entire tornado being enveloped and absorbed in an instant. The counter winds from her tornado had simply brought his winds to a stop instantly. Such power was leagues above him. Thought you would still have some fight in you. Tatsumaki sneered, pulling him up to face her. But nope, you're just weak. She snarled, before glowing even brighter. Her tornado started to pick up the pace, going far faster than he ever did. Chunks from all the rubble were picked up by her tornado, flying at obscene speeds. The rubble began to fly around him, slicing, cutting and hitting him everywhere. His body racked with pain from each hit, and gray fluid leaked from his body. He presumed that was his blood. A particularly large chunk of glass sliced his body in half. His scream of pain was cut short as his head was ripped off by a block of concrete. Huh, you're still alive. Looks like I actually have to rip you to shreds. Tatsumaki grinned, her smile full of malice. The tornado began to spin even faster, and more chunks of their surroundings began to whirl around inside it. Tornadon felt his body slowly being destroyed with every fiber of his being. His hand was next to go, disappearing in a flash of gray fluid. Then his leg. Searing pain came from everywhere, and there was nothing he could do about it. In the end, he just wished it was faster, since he couldn't even scream anymore. As his consciousness began to fade, he only could hope that the same was happening to her partner. The tornado began to die down, dropping Tornadon's body unceremoniously. It now resembled a pile of gray sludge. Panting, Tatsumaki fell to her knees as her exhaustion hit her. Creating and maintaining the tornado was very tiring and power-draining, but it was worth it. The hopelessness of Tornadon, damn, that felt invigorating, watching a monster cower in fear. To get a monster to realize that the fight would be utterly hopeless was a pleasant, albeit sadistic feeling. Suddenly, something impacted the ground next to her. It was a person, all cut up and broken. This person somehow was dragged in the tornado with Tornadon. Shit, if she killed a civilian, Tatsumaki would never live that down. Looking closer, Tatsumaki recognized the ripped tracksuit and the messy black hair. It suddenly hit her, who this person was. Saitama. Tatsumaki resisted the urge to scream. He's okay, right? Please tell me he's okay. Tatsumaki begged, pulling on the nurse's uniform. The poor nurse sighed as she tried to do her best to placate the anxious green-haired Esper. The doctor has already explained most of it to you. I'm just here to check his vitals again, which are not in good condition. Like the doctor said, he's gone through immense trauma. He has multiple broken bones, many deep cuts, and multiple bruises. He's lost a lot of blood. To be frank, I'd be surprised if he even makes it out alive. Tatsumaki's eyes widened as reality hit her. She had waved off the doctor's initial analysis, saying that his readings were inaccurate. What was she thinking? Hey, this must be her way of coping. Dismissing everything. Though truth be told, she didn't feel much. Just numb, as if she was disconnected by the world, viewing it through a TV screen. You could almost describe it as a wave of numbness spread over her body. Like painkillers, but for the mind. The scientists had conditioned her to feel this way, and for once in her life she appreciated it. She needed to be strong for her sister. Just like she had back in the labs. Tatsumaki stumbled out of a small chamber, with burn marks all over her body. She had just been subjected to heat resistance tests. She had seconds to adapt and defend herself before the room was ignited. Her improvised barriers had survived the 1000-degree temperatures, leaving the green Esper relatively safe. Even with her quick improvisation, she wasn't fast enough and her entire body burned with pain. She collapsed onto the floor, panting and quivering. Good job. You are proving to be quite the useful specimen. A man in a white lab coat drawled, writing something down on a clipboard. His face had not a single trace of pity or remorse on it, as he coldly analyzed the burnt Esper. Tatsumaki resisted the urge to sob. In the other room, she saw Fubuki being attached to a machine of some sort. It was through a one-way window. Like clockwork, Fubuki began to fidget and jerk in the straps, her screams getting louder and louder. Tatsumaki wanted to beg the scientist to stop it, but she knew that would only show weakness. They didn't want weakness from her. They wanted results. You did good today. I think we'll bring the tests down to 3 minutes 30. The scientist said, before turning away. And please, don't cry. You should be able to deal with the pain. Or else, he said, pointing at a timer on the wall, that goes up. The scientist casually strolled out of the room, as if torturing young children was a common occurrence for him. It was. Tatsumaki gritted her teeth. The pain, mixed in with the screams of her sister, were pushing her to the edge. But she knew that if she broke down and cried, it would only make it worse for her sister. She needed to be strong. For Fubuki. Over the past couple weeks, she had began encasing her emotions into an empty void. If things got bad, she could dump them into the void and feel nothing. Incredibly important for situations like these. Of course, she wasn't actually dumping her emotions into an empty void. But thinking about it like that was like a trigger, starting the process of numbness. Tatsumaki could already feel herself growing numb. The pain and sorrow faded away, with only a feeling of disconnection inside her. This was good. She needed to be strong for Fubuki. And for that, she needed to stop feeling, if only for a while. The routine tests that Fubuki went through technically weren't supposed to cause pain, but as they required a greater psychic output than Fubuki could produce, she had to constantly push herself to reach it. She was the control variable. After Tatsumaki invented or performed a new psychic action, Fubuki was forced to try to replicate it. It generally went well, however as Tatsumaki got stronger Fubuki began to lag behind more and more, to the point where she screamed in pain from exertion. Just like now. Tatsumaki sat down on one of the 2 chairs provided by the hospital, sinking into it. She leaned back, not even caring that her feet couldn't touch the floor. Usually, she got annoyed at that, but she wasn't feeling anything now. Saitama could die, probably would die, thanks to her. She'd expected her mind to be blown from that, but she just sat there like a lifeless puppet. Oni-chan, the occupant of the second chair asked. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. Sitting next to Tatsumaki was Fubuki, though if you compared her to what she was 2 months ago, you'd swear they were different people. Old Fubuki was a scared, vulnerable child while this one was dressed in posh, nice clothing and sat like a noble. Tatsumaki was thrilled that she had adapted to the business life so easily. Tatsumaki hated stuff like that. Who'd ever want to sit down for hours discussing money and contracts? But Fubuki was a natural. So then obviously, Tatsumaki let Fubuki handle all the business stuff while she trained with Saitama. She had to admit, Fubuki wasn't as close to Saitama as she was. But it was nice, but selfish, to see Fubuki crying too. Glad to see someone else cared about Saitama. Though, she had never cried for anyone, even Fubuki. She had come close, sure. But she knew the scientists would do bad things to Fubuki if she cried for her. So she never did. She wouldn't cry for Saitama now, not when she needed to be strong for Fubuki. Oni-chan. Fubuki's voice said, this time more sterner. She gently shook Tatsumaki. You okay? After you talked to that nurse you've been staring at the wall for at least 10 minutes. I'm just thinking. Saitama will live, I'm sure of it, Tatsumaki said, gently patting Fubuki's back. She couldn't break down here. She had to be strong, a pillar for Fubuki to lean on. He was not in good shape. He was nearly covered head to toe in bandages. He had casts on both arms. A tube was fitted to his nose to allow him to breathe easier. An IV was attached to his wrist to feed him nutrients. His breathing was almost silent, and his body hardly moved. If it wasn't for all the medical equipment and the monitors, he could pass as a dead person. Fubuki and Tatsumaki sat there in silence, the beeps of the monitors and the humming of the fan the only sound in the room. Fubuki stared helplessly at Saitama, tears welling up in her eyes again. Tatsumaki heard a choked cry from the other chair. Reaching over and patting Fubuki's back, Tatsumaki gently whispered in her ear. He's going to live, you know. He has to. You know, once he told me his dream was to become a hero so strong, he kills everything in one punch. If anything, I think he wants to kill monsters in one punch so he has more time to spend shopping. But, you know Saitama. He wouldn't give up on his dreams. Tatsumaki said, forcing herself to chuckle. Fubuki continued to cry as Tatsumaki comforted her. Eventually, things calmed down and they once more sat in silence, only interrupted by the occasional nurse coming in to check up on Saitama. She still felt nothing, if anything she felt a little bored. She didn't want to feel like this. She wanted to cry for Saitama, her dearest friend. But, she needed to be strong. Her coping method was strong. Perhaps maybe too strong. Honestly, at this point Tatsumaki wondered if she was even going to cry at all. Tatsumaki and Fubuki had been visiting Saitama for over a week now, though he wouldn't know. He appeared to be in a coma of sorts. Tatsumaki was still wearing that black dress that Saitama had given her, though it was a new one. She'd requested her tailor to make a dozen more of her dress in case one got ruined. Everything felt so odd to Tatsumaki. Only a week ago she'd woken up on a spare futon in Saitama's home, whereas today she had woken up in a luxury queen-sized bed. Fubuki had bought a penthouse in a luxurious skyscraper, and it still amazed her every time she woke up. Everything was so posh, so elegant, such a blatant show of wealth. Hell, even the milk in their penthouse cost more than an entire week's worth of groceries. She had to admit though, it was definitely top-notch. The nurse smiled kindly at them. While they had gone off to a rough start, Tatsumaki and Fubuki were now well-behaved, regular visitors. They would usually check on Saitama, leave him a couple gifts and then leave. Today was no different. Tatsumaki had picked out a nice fighting video game for Saitama, along with a handheld console. She dropped it off a table nearby, which already had a sizable amount of gifts on it. She supposed she was used to it now, but every time she saw Saitama lying on the bed she felt a pang in her heart. She did this to him, and now he was bedridden for who knows how long. He still hadn't woken up. Yesterday, the doctor pulled her over and gently explained his loss of brain activity. Tatsumaki nearly had blown up right there, a doctor, telling her to kill her friend. For what? The greater good, the act of mercy. By God, she was going to keep him alive as long as she could. The bills didn't matter. Senritsu Imports was a major company and was incredibly wealthy. Even if it took him a year to wake him up, she was going to wait till the very end. She resisted the urge to cry every time she saw him. Fubuki couldn't see her breaking down. Not now, not ever. She and Fubuki waved goodbye to the nurse, who smiled kindly at them. Her smile was full of hope and warmth, as if she knew for certain Saitama was going to wake up. On her way out, Tatsumaki's phone began to ring. She frowned. This was a new phone, one she had bought 2 days ago. She had a special plan that only the rich could afford, which meant no telemarketers. The only contact on it was Fubuki. Who got her number? How and why? Hello, Tatsumaki said, raising her phone to her ear. Hello, I am Sitch from the Hero Association. the voice on the other side said, before being cut off. Cut to the chase. I don't have all the time in the world, Sitch. Tatsumaki said, her voice irritated and impatient. Very well, Sitch said, coughing. Were you the one who stopped the tornado monster known as Tornadon? Yeah, what of it? Your power and abilities are exceptional. I am calling to offer you a job as a professional hero at the Hero Association. Professional hero? What the fuck is that supposed to mean? Tatsumaki said, annoyed yet intrigued. Sure, she was sitting on a ton of money. But she didn't want to be lazy. Saitama would want her to get a job. Plus, she killed monsters as a vigilante anyway, so might as well get paid for it. A part in the back of her mind also told her that Saitama would want her to be a hero, to help save and rescue people like he did. She had these great powers, she might as well help people with them. Saitama would do that, why wouldn't she? So, why did you become a vigilante in the first place? Tatsumaki asked Saitama. They had just walked out of a noodle store, where Saitama had stood up for a teenager being harassed by a couple of thugs. He had failed to cough up some drug money, but some quick convincing from Saitama's fists had shown the thugs there was no need to claim the debt. In that citation, Tatsumaki probably wouldn't have done anything. She might have intervened had the teenager not been a drug user. Those people kind of deserved what they got into. Therefore, she had been shocked when Saitama stood up and marched over to them. I've always been picked on when I was young, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. No one was there to help me, either. Now that I'm strong, I don't want anyone else to be in the same position I was in. If no one saves each other, who will save you? Tatsumaki scoffed. I'd prefer to just be in a position where I don't need to be saved. Saitama's words had directly countered blasts. Both people were big influences in her life, and Tatsumaki was torn between which side to accept. Saitama sighed. Look, no matter how strong you try to be, there's always going to be a point in your life when you need saving. You might as well try to come out on top of both sides, by being strong and also having people to save you. Tatsumaki wanted to argue, but she knew that he was right. Damn you, Saitama, for making me get this job. Tatsumaki thought. Basically, it means the same thing you are doing right now, as I presume you are a vigilante. However, there are some slight changes. We have devised a system that properly detects, monitors and gauges monsters, from strength to characteristics. Then, we will dispatch a hero or squad of heroes of equal strength to defeat said monster. With your powers, it's clear that you'll be one of the top heroes. There's a lot of strong monsters out there, and we'll make sure to give you one that is challenging. We know that's important to you. And, of course, there is also a lot of benefits, such as a private hospital should you be injured, a healthy salary and popularity. We'll do our best to promote you to the public in a good light. Tatsumaki felt herself nodding to his words. It made sense. Most of the monsters she had killed were too easy, with nothing to grow herself with. This hero association could prove to be useful. She didn't care much about the money, or fame. But she had to admit, people recognizing that she was a hero instead of some magical brat midget would be nice. Alright, I'm interested. Are we going to have an interview, or something? Just come to the Hero Association building at noon tomorrow. It's in a city, a big black skyscraper. You can't miss it. I'll text you the address. Fine. One question before you leave. Why didn't you guys deal with Tornadon? Tatsumaki said, curious. He had rampaged for a day straight and she hadn't seen any sign of any other supposed professional hero. We had our hands full with another monster. We were rushing to get back to Tornadon but you had stopped him already. Well, seems like she would need to carry them. Whatever though, being on top wasn't so bad. Who was that? Fubuki asked. Potential employer. Tatsumaki said curtly, before walking off. She needed time to think, but she probably was going to accept. It was literally exactly what she was doing now, with more benefits. Sure, she was going to get some orders. That was not that great. But she could probably deal with it. With her power, she'd easily be able to get her way. She wondered if they were going to call Fubuki. Probably not. She hadn't really used her power in public. No way of them to catch wind of her power. Well, When Saitama wakes up, she's gonna get him to join for sure. Tatsumaki sighed as she flicked on the TV, using her mental powers to scroll through the channels. Celebrity cooking show. She was going to watch that to learn some recipes. That is, until she saw a sweet mask on it. Ew. Dating game show. Hard pass. Basketball game. Nah, sports weren't her thing. Never really got to play them in school, anyway. The next channel was the news channel. Of course, who could hate the news channel? She leaned back in the plush leather sofa and waited to see if anything notable was going on. Tatsumaki regretted her words very much as soon as the breaking news came in, because on the screen was a scene of an hospital under attack from a monster of some sort. The very same hospital that Saitama was in. Racing through the air, the wind roared wildy around Tatsumaki as she flew through the air. It took her 30 minutes by car to get to the hospital, which means it should only take her 5 minutes maximum to get there. But a sinking feeling in her stomach told her she wasn't going to be fast enough, judging by the amount of explosions she could hear. In the distance, a massive fireball suddenly erupted, the sonic boom shaking the ground. Tatsumaki gritted her teeth as she pushed herself to go faster. I need to go faster. I can't let Saitama get hurt again. Tatsumaki created a small barrier around her as the wind grew even fiercer from her speed. She narrowly zipped between skyscrapers and apartment buildings, leaving a thin green trail behind her. The explosions began getting louder and now Tatsumaki could clearly see the fireballs erupting out of the hospital. There seemed to be a massive cloud of gray smoke surrounding the hospital, blocking her view of whoever was blowing it up. Screams, cries and desperate honking reached her ears as she neared the hospital. Tatsumaki noticed people fleeing from the area, most on foot. From above, it was like a wave of people had suddenly swept through. A lot of them were holding rags to their faces, probably from all the smoke and ash in the air. The area was littered with abandoned vehicles and small fires. The sky was turning an angry orange and red from all the particles and fire in the air. It reminded Tatsumaki of a war zone, or a hellscape. Of course, not all people were fleeing. She was disgusted when she noticed a couple people staying and looting the dropped possessions in evacuated stores. How low must you stoop to take advantage of a crisis like this? Such people were scum. She would have dealt with them, but Saitama was her #1 priority. Landing down next to the hospital, she conjured a shield as she floated through the wall of smoke. It was pretty suspicious that the entire hospital was surrounded by a wall of smoke. It was probably the monster's doing. On the other side of the wall was the hospital, and boy did it not look good. The one pristine white walls were now charred with black soot and ash. The Red Cross was actually gone, along with most of the hospital's roof. The hospital itself wasn't the biggest, reaching only 3 floors in height. Yet it still unnerved Tatsumaki to see a large chunk of it missing, with smoldering debris littering the huge hole. Shit, there were probably people that needed to be evacuated, and more importantly, the ones that were critically injured, like Saitama. Damn, how would she save the people that needed special machines to live? She couldn't just unplug them. They would have to stay. That meant, Tatsumaki needed to kill that monster ASAP. Looking around, Tatsumaki spotted a body on the ground. It was someone in a red suit with a yellow smiley face on it. His suit was ripped and badly burned. So was the skin. Beside him was a large mallet of some sort. Must be a pro hero, though a weak one at that. Tatsumaki thought, before she noticed another body in front of him. This one was a man with a weird curly mustache that was burnt at the ends in a green suit. His sword lay beside him, still shining somehow despite being covered in soot. Tatsumaki followed the bodies, seeing the trail of supposed pro-heroes. Are they really this weak, or is that monster really that strong? Some of them didn't even look half bad, in terms of strength. In the distance Tatsumaki saw a large figure. It appeared to be a large hunchback man. Well, he would be considered a man if his skin wasn't an angry red. And if he wasn't twice the size of a normal person. And if one of his arms had a large rocket launcher on the end instead of a forearm. And if his eyes weren't completely red. He wore a green military uniform of some sort, with a couple medals adorning his chest. On his head, he wore a small green beret. Spotting her, the monster bellowed and thumped his chest. I am Warmonger. I used to be an army vet, until I was denied my pension and insurance for my medical condition. I fused with my rocket launcher and became a demon, ready to destroy this corrupt government. Honestly, Tatsumaki wanted to test some new moves on this guy, but time was of the essence. Who knows if the fire spread or if the smoke choked Saitama. She was going to finish this quickly. Yeah, go lobby your city mayor or something instead, Tatsumaki said, ripping out a large chunk of the ground. She launched it at Warmonger, only for him to shoot a rocket that blew it to bits. Great, I guess I'll just vaporize you instead. She lifted her arm and shot an energy blast at Warmonger. It caught him square in the chest and he grunted as it collided with him. It burned his suit and some of his skin underneath it, but otherwise he seemed unaffected. Flying backwards, Warmonger shot another missile, this one traveling directly in Tatsumaki. She dodged it, only for it to loop around and target her again. Really? Homing missiles? Tatsumaki sighed, stopping the missile midair before launching it back at Warmonger. However, he shot another rocket that collided with it, creating a big explosion in the air. Let's try this again, Tatsumaki said, shooting another energy blast at him. However, this blast was considerably brighter and thicker. Raising his arm, Warmonger quickly blocked it with his left arm, which was blown into bits. He howled in pain before shooting a salvo of rockets at Tatsumaki. They all flew at her, some adjusting to her position while the others didn't. She created a barrier in front of her, but was shocked when some sprayed fire everywhere when they exploded and some released smoke. It appeared he had multiple different types of rockets in his arsenal. Shit, Tatsumaki murmured, noticing her barrier flickering. His rockets were a lot stronger than she thought, and with the seemingly unlimited amount of rockets he had, she needed to get rid of him before he began shooting up the hospital and the fallen heroes. Releasing a salvo of her own, she grit her teeth in annoyance as he shot rockets to block them all. Silly child, that won't work on me again, Warmonger taunted, popping a vein in Tatsumaki's forehead. I'm not a fucking child, she screeched, picking up chunks of the ground and hurling it at him. Warmonger blasted through most of them, but some made it through. He grunted as they collided with him, launching him across the pavement. He managed to skid to a stop, using his rocket launching to kill his momentum. However, at that moment Tatsumaki appeared behind him, blasting him with a concentrated beam of energy. His backside exploded, spewing chunks of red monster meat all over Tatsumaki. Luckily, her barrier blocked it all. Collapsing onto the ground, Warmonger's eyes almost closed, before they snapped open. No, I must destroy the hospital, he screamed, shooting a barrage of rockets at Tatsumaki. Caught unawares, she quickly raised a barrier to protect herself but was shocked when napalm spread everywhere, all over her shield and on the ground. Warmonger jumped into the air, bashing the shield with his rocket launcher. Tatsumaki grunted. He was heavier than he looked. Slowly but surely, he was cracking the shield. Tatsumaki could feel the intense heat beginning to build up under her as the napalm spread. She should have heat-proofed her barrier, but she didn't think she would need it. As the heat intensified, a crack suddenly appeared in her barrier. Ha, Warmonger said, jamming his rocket launcher into it. Just as the missile was about to leave the tube, it was suddenly stopped, before beginning to move backwards. The missile detonated inside Warmonger's arm, blowing it to smithereens. He howled in pain, before beginning to bash Tatsumaki's shield with his head. The crack began to grow. Cursing herself, Tatsumaki gritted her teeth as she tried to manipulate Warmonger. His arm slowly stopped moving as it was surrounded by a green hue, then the rest of his body followed. Get off of me, Tatsumaki screamed, blasting Warmonger into the pavement, creating a sizable crater. Warmonger lay still, his second wind gone. Well, she sighed, dusting her hands off. Crisis averted. Now, all she had to do was wait for the fire trucks to arrive. The fire hadn't spread to Saitama's area yet, and she doubted the people left inside the burning section of the hospital were still alive. Though a part of her mind told her to check anyway. A disapproving image of Saitama was conjured up. Feeling slightly guilty, she moved the fallen heroes' bodies away from the flames. They would soon die down. Lifting the last hero up in the air, which was incredibly close to Warmonger's corpse, Tatsumaki was aware of a faint beeping. Her eyes widened. No way. No fucking way. Final move, hell detonation, Warmonger whispered, as the massive napalm bomb hidden inside him detonated. Caught between a rock and a hard place, Tatsumaki created an incredibly powerful barrier around all the fallen heroes just milliseconds before a scorching hot wave of fire encased them. She attempted to cover the hospital as well, but she was too late and the hospital was too big. There was no way at her current power to encompass a shield powerful enough over such a big area. Maybe she could, given enough time. Unfortunately, bombs took but a second to detonate. Somewhere in the flames, she heard a fleeting laugh from Warmonger. As the flames died down, she let down the barrier and looked at the hospital, now mostly gone. It was almost charred completely black now, and the inside definitely was no better. The building almost glowed with embers, nothing in it would have survived. At that moment, three things hit Tatsumaki. 1. She failed to save Saitama. 2. She could have saved Saitama if it wasn't for these heroes needing to be saved. They were weaklings, ones who dragged her down. 3. She wasn't strong enough. She felt all her dams, her emotional defenses breaking down. Her feet touched the ground, the green hue around her fading. She sank to her knees. For the first time ever, Tatsumaki began to cry for someone else.